Daniel Brooks did not move right away. That alone was unusual. His entire life had been built on fast decisions, calculated risks, immediate action. Yet something about the way Emily Carter had spoken created a pause he could not immediately explain. He glanced down at his phone again, pretending to continue reading a message from his chief financial officer about a $75 million expansion, but the numbers no longer held his focus. Instead, he became aware of things he normally filtered out. The soft clink of glass being set down too carefully. A man near the bar, checking his watch twice within 30 seconds. Another man pretending to read a menu he had not turned in 5 minutes. Daniel slowly lifted his water glass, more to buy time than a drink. "What exactly do you think is going to happen?" he asked quietly without looking at her. Emily did not answer immediately. She reached for the check presenter from a nearby empty table and repositioned it by exactly 1 inch, as if symmetry mattered more than conversation. "I think," she said carefully, "that you are used to seeing patterns in numbers." Daniel gave a faint nod. That part was true. "I see patterns in behavior." That made him look up again. Her tone remained neutral. No drama, no attempt to impress him, just a statement. "The 2 men behind you arrived 12 minutes apart," she continued quietly. They did not greet each other, but they ordered the same coffee. Black, no sugar. Neither of them drank it. Daniel felt a small shift in his attention. Still skeptical, but listening now. "Coincidence exists," he said. Emily nodded slightly. "Yes, but coincidence does not usually check the same exit sign 4 times." Daniel did not turn around. He knew better than to make something obvious. Instead, he studied the reflection in the window beside him. Just slightly, enough to see shapes. Movement. One of the men had an earpiece. Very small, skin-colored, easy to miss. Daniel felt something unfamiliar move through his chest. Not panic, awareness. "And you noticed this because?" he asked. Emily folded a napkin slowly, pressing the edges flat. "Because before I worked here," she said, "I worked somewhere that trained me to notice when something did not match the environment." Daniel waited. She did not elaborate. "What kind of place?" he asked. "Emergency communications." She replied, "911 dispatch." That landed differently. Daniel looked at her again with new calculation. "You're telling me you went from handling emergencies to serving lunch?" Emily gave the smallest hint of a smile. Not bitter, not defensive, just factual. Life does not always follow a straight promotion ladder. That answer stayed with him. He respected answers that did not ask for sympathy. Across the room, one of the men adjusted his sleeve. Emily's eyes tracked the motion for half a second. Then she looked back at Daniel. "You still have about 1 minute," she said quietly. 1 minute until what?" Daniel asked. Emily picked up his water pitcher and refilled his glass, even though it was already nearly full. Her voice remained almost conversational. "Until someone else makes a decision for you." That sentence settled heavily between them. For the first time, Daniel Brooks closed his email without replying. For the first time in a very long time, he was considering taking advice from someone with no visible reason to advise him at all. And for reasons he would not fully understand until much later, he began to trust the precision of her calm more than the confidence of his own certainty. Daniel Brooks had built his reputation on reading rooms faster than anyone else in corporate America. Yet now he sat perfectly still, realizing he had completely missed the silent conversation happening around him until a woman refilling his water had pointed it out. He did not like that feeling, not because it frightened him, but because it challenged something deeper. His assumption that awareness belonged to people with power. Emily stepped back as another server passed behind her carrying 2 plates of grilled salmon. The normal rhythm of lunch service continuing like nothing unusual existed. That was the strangest part. Everything looked normal. That was exactly what made it abnormal. Daniel slowly reached for his suit jacket, not putting it on, just touching the fabric as if reminding himself he could leave whenever he wanted. "If I stand up right now," he said quietly, "what happens?" Emily did not hesitate. "Then you leave early and nothing happens to you." Daniel studied her face carefully. "And if I stay?" For the first time, she paused for half a second. Not fear, calculation. then you're depending on timing that is not yours. That answer sat heavier than he expected. Daniel glanced again toward the window reflection. One of the men had finally lifted his coffee. Still had not taken a sip, just held it, waiting. Daniel had seen that posture before. Boardrooms, negotiations, people waiting for a signal. His instincts were beginning to agree with hers, and that irritated him more than anything. He was not used to catching up to someone else's awareness. "Why warn me?" he asked suddenly. "You do not know me." Emily gave a small shrug. "I know enough." "What does that mean?" Daniel asked. She answered without hesitation. "You always thank the staff, even when you are distracted. You tip the busboy, not just the server. You asked the hostess last winter if she was feeling better after she had the flu." Daniel blinked slightly. He did not even remember that. Emily continued calmly. "People show who they are in small moments when they think nobody important is watching." That sentence landed harder than any compliment he had received in years. Daniel let out a slow breath. "So this is what? Your way of returning a favor?" Emily shook her head slightly. "No, this is just what you do when you notice something before someone else does." At that exact moment, one of the men near the bar touched his wrist as if adjusting a watch. Emily's eyes moved instantly. Her voice dropped slightly. 30 seconds. Daniel did not ask how she knew. He was past that question now. He stood slowly, calm, no sudden movement, just another executive finishing lunch early. He reached into his wallet and placed 3 $100 bills on the table without looking at the total. Emily did not react to the money. She only watched the room. Daniel took one step away from the table, then another. His heartbeat felt louder than the restaurant music. Not fear, awareness sharpening. As he passed Emily, he said quietly, "If you were wrong, I just walked out of a $12 million negotiation." Emily answered without looking at him, "And if I am right, you just walked away with something more valuable." Daniel stopped for half a second. "What is that?" Emily finally looked at him directly. "Choice." 5 seconds later, the front door opened with sudden urgency. Conversation stopped. Several officers entered quickly but professionally, their presence shifting the air in the room without chaos. Without raised voices, just authority filling the space. Daniel stood near the exit now, watching as the 2 men who never drank their coffee became the focus of quiet attention. No one shouted. No one ran. Just quiet efficiency. Daniel looked back once. Emily was already picking up another table's empty plates like nothing extraordinary had happened. Invisible again. And for the first time in many years, Daniel Brooks realized the most capable person in the room had never been the one anyone was watching. Daniel did not leave the restaurant right away. That surprised him more than anything else. Most people in his position would have walked straight to their car, called their security team, and turned the incident into another control variable. But he stayed just outside the entrance, standing beneath the polished brass awning of Hawthorne Grill, watching through the glass as the quiet disruption unfolded with remarkable precision. No shouting, no panic, just a shift in gravity. Conversations lowered to whispers, phones slowly lifted, curiosity replacing comfort. Daniel noticed how professionally everything was handled. The officers spoke calmly. The manager nodded nervously. The 2 men who had been pretending to be customers now looked like men who had run out of good explanations. Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling something unfamiliar settle into his thoughts. Not relief, perspective. For the first time, he was calculating a situation he had almost remained inside. His driver pulled the black sedan closer to the curb. "Sir," the driver asked through the open rear door. Daniel did not answer immediately. His eyes were still searching inside the restaurant. He found her near table 14, wiping down a marble surface with slow, practiced movements. No ruse, no need for recognition. She had already moved on. That unsettled him more than the situation itself. Most people would have waited for things, waited for validation, waited to be seen. She had returned to work, as if preventing a problem was just another task between refilling coffee and clearing plates. Daniel finally stepped back inside, not as a customer now, not as a target, just as a man with a question he could not ignore. The manager noticed him first. "Mr. Brooks, we are very sorry for the disturbance. Your lunch will of course be complimentary." Daniel shook his head slightly. That is not why I came back. His eyes moved past him, found Emily again. She was placing a fresh glass of iced tea in front of an elderly couple, listening carefully as they asked about the soup of the day. Present, focused, as if nothing unusual had happened. Daniel waited until she finished. Then he approached quietly. "You knew," he said. Not a question. Emily glanced up briefly. No surprise in her expression. "I suspected," she corrected gently. Daniel studied her again, trying to understand the math behind her certainty. "How long before you called it in?" he asked. Emily picked up a folded receipt from the table and placed it neatly into the presenter. "About 2 minutes after they sat down." Daniel blinked. 2 minutes. Emily nodded. They walked like they were measuring the room, not like they were hungry. Daniel almost smiled at that. "And you were sure enough to act?" Emily met his gaze calmly. "When you spend years listening to people call on the worst day of their lives, you learn not to ignore the early signs." Daniel folded his arms slightly. "You could have been wrong." Emily nodded without hesitation. "Yes. And you would risk your job on a maybe?" Daniel asked. Emily's answer came without drama. Doing nothing would have been the bigger risk. That stayed with him. He reached into his pocket and handed her a simple white business card. No gold lettering, no theatrics, just his name, his direct number. "If you ever want a different kind of work," he said, "call me." Emily looked at the card for exactly 1 second. Then she handed it back, not disrespectfully, just certain. "Thank you," she said softly, "but I already have work that matters." Daniel did not pull his hand back right away. That answer did something unexpected. It removed the advantage he was used to having. For the first time in a long time, an offer of opportunity had not been the most valuable thing in the conversation. And as he finally stepped away, Daniel Brooks understood something he had never put into numbers before. Some people do not measure success by what they can gain. Some measure it by what they refuse to ignore. Daniel did not leave the restaurant right away. That surprised him more than anything else. Most people in his position would have walked straight to their car, called their security team, and turned the incident into another controlled variable. But he stayed just outside the entrance, standing beneath the polished brass awning of Hawthorne Grill, watching through the glass as the quiet disruption unfolded with remarkable precision. No shouting, no panic, just a shift in gravity. Conversations lowered to whispers. Phones slowly lifted. Curiosity replacing comfort. Daniel noticed how professionally everything was handled. The officer spoke calmly. The manager nodded nervously. The two men who had been pretending to be customers now looked like men who had run out of good explanations. Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling something unfamiliar settle into his thoughts. Not relief, perspective. For the first time, he was calculating a situation he had almost remained inside. His driver pulled the black sedan closer to the curb. "Sir," the driver asked through the open rear door. Daniel did not answer immediately. His eyes were still searching inside the restaurant. He found her near table 14, wiping down a marble surface with slow, practiced movements. No ruse, no need for recognition. She had already moved on. That unsettled him more than the situation itself. Most people would have waited for thanks, waited for validation, waited to be seen. She had returned to work, as if preventing a problem was just another task between refilling coffee and clearing plates. Daniel finally stepped back inside, not as a customer now, not as a target, just as a man with a question he could not ignore. The manager noticed him first. "Mr. Brooks, we are very sorry for the disturbance. Your lunch will, of course, be complimentary." Daniel shook his head slightly. "That is not why I came back." His eyes moved past him, found Emily again. She was placing a fresh glass of iced tea in front of an elderly couple, listening carefully as they asked about the soup of the day. Present, focused, as if nothing unusual had happened. Daniel waited until she finished. Then he approached quietly. "You knew," he said. Not a question. Emily glanced up briefly. No surprise in her expression. "I suspected," she corrected gently. Daniel studied her again, trying to understand the math behind her certainty. "How long before you called it in?" he asked. Emily picked up a folded receipt from the table and placed it neatly into the presenter. "About 2 minutes after they sat down." Daniel blinked. 2 minutes. Emily nodded. They walked like they were measuring the room. Not like they were. Hungry. Daniel almost smiled at that. And you were sure enough to act? Emily met his gaze calmly. When you spend years listening to people call on the worst day of their lives, you learn not to ignore the early signs. Daniel folded his arms slightly. You could have been wrong. Emily nodded without hesitation. Yes. And you would risk your job on a maybe? Daniel asked. Emily's answer came without drama. Doing nothing would have been the bigger risk. That stayed with him. He reached into his pocket and handed her a simple white business card. No gold lettering, no theatrics, just his name, his direct number. If you ever want a different kind of work, he said, call me. Emily looked at the card for exactly 1 second. Then she handed it back. Not disrespectfully, just certain. Thank you, she said softly. But I already have work that matters. Daniel did not pull his hand back right away. That answer did something unexpected. It removed the advantage he was used to having. For the first time in a long time, an offer of opportunity had not been the most valuable thing in the conversation. And as he finally stepped away, Daniel Brooks understood something he had never put into numbers before. Some people do not measure success by what they can gain. Some measure it by what they refuse to ignore. Daniel Brooks did not return to Hawthorne Grill for 3 days. Not because he was avoiding the place, but because something about that afternoon refused to fit neatly into his usual categories. It was not a business interaction. It was not a transaction. It was not even gratitude. It was something quieter, something unfinished. On Friday at 12:11 p.m., 3 minutes earlier than his usual arrival time, he stepped back through the same glass doors. The host recognized him immediately and straightened slightly. Welcome back, Mr. Brooks. Daniel nodded, but did not sit right away. His eyes scanned the room with a different kind of awareness now. Not looking for threats, looking for her. Emily Carter was at the far end of the dining room balancing a tray with 3 iced teas and a bowl of clam chowder, moving with the same calm efficiency he remembered. She did not notice him at first. Daniel realized something unusual then. In his world, people always noticed him first. He waited until she finished placing the drinks before approaching. You were right, he said simply. Emily looked up, recognition settling in without surprise. About which part? She asked. Daniel almost smiled. That choice matters more than timing sometimes. Emily gave a small nod as if filing that away. Did everything work out? She asked. Daniel considered the question. My security team confirmed there was an ongoing investigation. Apparently, I was not supposed to know about it. Emily's expression did not change. Sometimes the safest information is the kind nobody announces. Daniel studied her again. You really are not curious what happened after I left. Emily shook her head gently. My job is noticing when something starts, not following how it ends. That answer stayed with him. You ever miss it? He asked. Dispatch work. Emily took a moment before answering. I miss helping people before they realize they need help. Then she added quietly, but you cannot carry everyone's emergencies forever. Sometimes you choose a quieter way to be useful. Daniel understood that more than he expected. He had spent 20 years carrying companies, employees, expectations. He suddenly wondered what a quieter usefulness might look like. He placed something on the table between them. Not a business card this time. A folded envelope. Emily did not touch it. What is it? She asked. Nothing complicated, Daniel replied. A letter of recommendation. If you ever decide to go back into emergency management or risk analysis. No strings. No obligación. Emily looked at the envelope, but kept her hands at her sides. Why? She asked. Daniel answered honestly. Because competence should not stay invisible just because it is humble. That was the first time her expression softened slightly. Not pride, recognition. Thank you, she said. Then after a second she added, but I would only use it if I earned it again. Daniel gave a slow nod. That is exactly why I wrote it. A manager called her name from across the room. Another table needed attention. Life continuing. Emily picked up the envelope finally, but did not open it. Take care of yourself, Mr. Brooks, she said. Daniel paused before answering. Daniel, he corrected gently. Emily considered that, then nodded once. Take care of yourself, Daniel. As she walked away, Daniel sat down at his usual table, but nothing about the seat felt usual anymore. For the first time, he was not thinking about acquisitions or margins or leverage. He was thinking about awareness, about how the most important intervention in his week had come from someone with no title, no authority, and no interest in recognition. And as the afternoon light settled again across the quiet restaurant, Daniel Brooks understood a truth no quarterly report had ever taught him. The people who change your life rarely ask for credit. They just notice the moment when you need to step aside. The following Monday it rained, a steady gray curtain falling over the city, turning reflections on the pavement into blurred mirrors of people rushing without looking up. Daniel Brooks sat in the back of his car outside Hawthorne Grill, but did not get out right away. His driver waited without speaking. Daniel had told him once that silence was part of professionalism. Today he appreciated that rule more than ever. On the seat beside him was a thin folder his internal team had prepared without him even asking. That was how his world worked. Information appeared before he requested it. The top page had a simple heading: Emily Carter, employment history, education, certifications. Daniel closed the folder after reading only half the first page. Something about digging further felt wrong. Not illegal, not unethical, just unnecessary. She had not tried to impress him. She had not tried to gain anything. Turning her life into a report felt like missing the entire point. He left the folder on the seat and stepped out into the rain. Inside, the restaurant smelled like fresh bread and dark roast coffee, the kind of ordinary comfort that hid extraordinary people. Emily was near the register, speaking quietly with a younger server who looked overwhelmed, her hand resting briefly on the girl's shoulder in a gesture that looked less like instruction and more like reassurance. Daniel noticed that immediately. Leadership without title. The younger server nodded and straightened up before returning to her tables with new confidence. Emily turned and saw Daniel, her expression unchanged except for a small acknowledging nod. No surprise, no performance, just awareness. You always come in before the lunch rush now, she observed. Daniel pulled out his chair. I'm learning the value of early signals. Emily allowed the smallest hint of amusement. Most problems announce themselves quietly first. Daniel considered that. And most leaders ignore that part, he admitted. Emily did not answer right away. She placed his usual sparkling water on the table. No ice. Still remembered. People do not ignore it, she said finally. They just convince themselves they have more time. That sentence stayed between them like a shared understanding. Daniel hesitated before speaking again. My company is starting a risk awareness initiative next quarter, training executives to notice operational blind spots. Emily listened, but did not react. Last week I would have filled it with consultants who charge $2,000 per hour, Daniel continued. Now I'm thinking about something different. Emily tilted her head slightly. Different how? Daniel answered carefully. Real awareness does not always come from people with impressive resumes. Sometimes it comes from people who had to pay attention because mistakes had real consequences. Emily's eyes held his for a moment. Mesuring intention. Awareness is not a skill you teach in a seminar, she said quietly. It is a habit you build when nobody else is paying attention. Daniel nodded slowly. That was exactly it. Would you ever consider speaking to a group like that? He asked. Not as an employee, not as a consultant, just as someone who understands what noticing looks like. Emily did not answer immediately. She looked around the restaurant, at the busy kitchen door, at the servers moving between tables, at the ordinary life she had chosen. Maybe, she said finally, if the lesson is about paying attention to people, not power. Daniel gave a small nod. That would be the only lesson. Emily picked up his empty bread plate and replaced it with a fresh one without breaking the quiet rhythm of the moment. Outside, the rain continued. Inside, nothing dramatic happened. No headlines, no applause. Just two people from completely different worlds sharing and understanding neither of them had expected to find. And as Daniel Brooks watched a woman with no executive title quietly improve every room she walked through, he began to understand that influence and importance were not always the same thing. 2 weeks later, the invitation arrived without ceremony. A simple email printed on standard paper, because Emily did not like reading important things on a phone screen. Daniel Brooks had kept his word. No pressure, no follow-up calls, just a date, a time, and a single sentence. Speak only about what you believe matters. She almost declined, not because she was afraid, but because she understood how easily important messages could be turned into entertainment when presented to people who were used to comfort. On Thursday morning, she stood outside a glass tower that reached 42 stories into the sky, the headquarters of Brooks Dynamics. The revolving doors reflected her simple navy coat and practical shoes. Nothing about her appearance suggesting she had been invited to speak to executives who managed budgets larger than some small cities. A security officer greeted her politely. Her name was already approved. Temporary badge printed. Efficient. Predictable. Upstairs, Daniel watched through the conference room glass as 20 senior leaders took their seats around a long walnut table. People who controlled logistics networks, financial exposure, infrastructure planning. All of them confident, all of them intelligent, many of them distracted. When Emily entered the room, there was a brief silence. Not disrespectful, just curiosity. She did not rush. She did not try to command the space. She simply stood where everyone could see her and waited until the room settled on its own. Daniel noticed that immediately. She did not demand attention. She allowed people to realize they should give it. "I'm not here to teach you business," she began calmly. "You already know more about business than I ever will." A few polite smiles appeared. Guarded. Professional. "I am here because you asked how someone without authority noticed something your security reports did not mention." Now they were listening. She continued. "The answer is simple. I was not looking for danger. I was looking for things that did not belong." She walked slowly around the table. No slides, no notes. Two people sitting without eating. A conversation that had no emotion. A door checked too many times. Most people see these things. They just decide they are not important enough to interrupt their day. One executive leaned forward slightly. Another stopped checking his phone. Emily's voice remained steady. Awareness is not about intelligence. It is about permission. You have to give yourself permission to pause when something feels wrong, even if it costs you 5 minutes or makes you look overly cautious. Daniel watched his leadership team differently now, not measuring their confidence, measuring their listening. Emily stopped near the window overlooking the city. "When I worked emergency calls, the hardest part was never the crisis. It was convincing people to act before the crisis." She looked back at them. Power makes people believe they have more time than they do. But reality does not adjust itself to someone's calendar. The room was completely silent now. No performance, just truth landing where it needed to land. She finished with the same quiet tone she had used in the restaurant weeks earlier. "The question is not whether you can control outcomes. The question is whether you are paying attention early enough to still have choices." She did not wait for applause. She simply nodded once toward Daniel and stepped back. And in a room filled with people accustomed to being the most important voice, the most memorable lesson had been delivered by someone who had never needed a microphone. The room remained quiet for several seconds after Emily Carter finished speaking. Not because people did not understand her words, but because they did. Daniel Brooks had seen thousands of presentations in that same conference room. Charts, strategies, forecasts, all impressive, all forgettable within days. This was different. No graphics, no sales language, just perspective. One of his senior vice presidents finally spoke. "So you're saying awareness is more valuable than control?" Emily answered without hesitation. "Control is what you try to build after you miss the early signs." That answer stayed in the air long after she finished. When a meeting ended, executives did something unusual. Instead of rushing to their next calls, several approached her quietly to thank her. Not because she outranked them, because she had reminded them of something they had forgotten while climbing. Daniel waited until the room emptied before speaking. "You change how they think," he said. Emily shook her head gently. "No, I just reminded them to slow down long enough to notice what they already see." Daniel walked her to the elevator himself. No assistants, no announcements, just a quiet walk down a long corridor lined with awards and framed magazine covers with his face on them. Emily glanced at one briefly. "Does it ever feel strange?" she asked. Seeing your own name everywhere, Daniel considered the question honestly. It used to feel like proof I was doing something right. He paused. Now it mostly feels like noise. Emily gave a small, understanding nod. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Before she stepped inside, Daniel spoke again. There is a permanent position if you ever want it. Risk culture advisor. Flexible hours. You would help us build what you described today. Emily did not answer immediately. She looked at the offer the same way she had looked at his first business card. Not with temptation, with evaluation. I will think about it, she said finally, but only if it stays about people, not titles. Daniel nodded. That is the only version that would work. The doors closed gently. Daniel stood there longer than necessary, not thinking about hiring her, thinking about earning the kind of trust that made someone like her say yes. 3 months later, a small change appeared inside Brooks Dynamics. No press release, no announcement. A new practice began. Meetings started 5 minutes later. The first 5 minutes were now called observation time. No phones, no speaking, just noticing. Patterns, risks, people. The idea came from a woman who still worked lunch shifts 3 days a week because she believed staying close to ordinary life kept her judgment honest. Daniel adopted one more habit quietly. Every time he entered a room, he asked himself a question he had never considered before. Who here is paying attention that nobody else sees? And sometimes, on certain afternoons, he still returned to Hawthorne Grill, sat at the same window table, and watched a woman with no interest in recognition continue to raise the standard without raising her voice. Because in the end, he had learned something no balance sheet could measure. The strongest people in a room are often the ones who never needed the room to prove their worth.